What experiences have helped you prepare for the level of professionalism and leadership required of school board members?
I would say several. First of all, my mother was a teacher, taught fifth grade for many years, was Lee Summit's first specialist of any kind. She was named reading specialist, so I got a lot of good basics early on. My work experience, I worked for John Deere Company for 10.5 years. Some of that time was involved in working with the dealers on a financial basis, anything from budgeting to even teaching a bookkeeper. In some cases, almost had to teach books from scratch. So I've got a good financial background there, I feel. Then since '85, I've been in banking, commercial lending. Naturally, we're looking at financial statements concerning our borrowers and so forth, and analyzing, their budgeting and so forth, their operations. So I think one thing, again, the work experience and the background I've had, I can bring something to the table maybe as far as more the business end of things.
Okay. What do you consider major challenges and priorities for the district, and how will you address?
Well, I think the main priority is to prepare each student for success in life, and I think Lee Summit does that very well, the Lee Summit School District. The challenges, I feel, are the possible diminishing of the school district in some people's eyes, maybe not only here in Lee Summit, but possibly the Kansas City area. I think there are a lot of positives that the school district has to promote, but I feel that right now there are just mainly negatives being presented or stated, and I think that needs to change. We need to make sure that all, including everybody in the Kansas City area, the state, the city of Lee Summit, knows what a good school district we have. We have many things to offer, from early beginnings to Miller Park to Hilltop. We have every resource here to make every student successful.
Okay. What do you believe should be a primary focus of the school board, and why?
Well, the primary focus, again, is to prepare each student for success in life. You want to have teachers and administrative staff, people that are happy working for the district. You want to have a good working relationship with the business community, the citizens, the taxpayers of Lee Summit. But also the job of the board is to supervise the superintendent. The superintendent reports to the board, so I think there should be a more than reasonable amount of involvement in working with the superintendent, determining policies, procedures, this type of thing.
Okay. How does our district maintain and continue to improve its services and reputation?
Well, I think several ways. For example, the Early Childhood Education Center. Parents as teachers, Lee Summit has 27, Blue Springs has 3. I've been fortunate enough to visit with a few principals and some teachers over the last few weeks, and I've been very impressed with all I have talked to. I feel that everyone I have talked to feels that our teachers are capable of teaching any student successfully. I think that's the main thing we have to promote, is the district, what we have to offer. We have, very highly rated schools, obviously, and that needs to be promoted. Again, all the services we have, from early childhood development, Miller Park, Hilltop, we have many, many things to offer that many districts do not have, and this needs to be promoted and talked about.
Okay. The R7 district bylaws clearly define the relationship between the school board and the R7 staff. Please describe how you envision your working relationship with staff.
Staff meaning principals and teachers and administrators as well, all involved, I would assume. Well, I think, again, the direct responsibility is the supervision of the superintendent. Again, the superintendent reports to the board. But along that, I think budgetary issues, I don't think it's unfair or unwise to ask for information concerning the budget. I believe the budget's around $242 million. I think roughly, 64% of that is local and 30 is state, something like that, the rest federal and county. So I think the board can question, or not question, but ask to see the budget and be able to go line item by line item and see what is in that budget. Budget that big, maybe cuts can be made to increase pay, whatever it might be. As far as staff, principals, teachers, for example, I don't see anything wrong with the board member visiting schools occasionally and just letting the principals and the teachers know that you appreciate them and are interested in their jobs and what they feel any concerns might be, although there might be a little fine line there between that, getting too deep with teachers on some concerns. But I think that is something that needs to be listened to. Maybe certain elements of, let's say, elementary school education can be improved. Math, something like that. One common denominator I am hearing quite often is that, math proficiencies are lower than you would hope they would be. For example, Lee Summit West, I think, had the highest at 71%, and Lee Summit North were around 66%, give or take. I think there's a concern that the way math is taught might be improved in some fashion. So I think there are a lot of things that a board member can do if you know the right questions to ask and ask them tactfully, that you can get good information.
Okay. You touched on this earlier, but please summarize your qualifications and level of financial expertise appropriate to govern a $300 million school district.
Well, again, if it's qualification or background, whatever, I've lived here. Probably the only ones that lived here longer than me are Bud Herzog and Ron Williams, I bet, really, when you get right down to it. We moved here and, ooh, that's you could interpret that several ways. But anyway, we moved here in '57 when I was in first grade, and I graduated from Lee Summit. I got a BA in business administration from Westminster in Fulton, Missouri. And again, the work experience that I mentioned earlier, heavy financial experience with John Deere Company, and again, being in banking and commercial lending, you do obviously see a lot of financial situations over the years. Also, one thing that may be more important than maybe first thought or considered is the ability to talk to attorneys. I know that there are attorneys involved, obviously, with the school board and school district. But that's one thing I have done. I've never been sued, luckily, as a banker. But I've talked to plenty of attorneys over the years, and I think there is a certain technique for knowing how to talk to attorneys and, kind of feeling them out, what direction they're going. But that may be a plus in today's environment.
Okay. What is your approach to conflict resolution among board members? And describe a time in which your mind was changed regarding an important issue.
Well, that's always a good one, isn't it? The first thing, you have to listen to everybody's point of view. There's no doubt about that. That's number one. Carefully consider what each person is saying. If you have further questions as to why that person feels that way, then ask additional questions. As far as something that I have really changed my mind on as such, I guess, you could go back to even things like John Deere days when everybody would be people that have the same job I would. We might have different approaches on how to do it, but then you would try to come to some consensus. I guess the same thing could be in a loan committee at the bank. There can be various points of view on this loan or that loan, and eventually there has to be a consensus on if you want to make the loan, not make the loan, whatever that case might be. So as far as that's concerned, I have been in situations where I have had to listen to other points of view.
Okay. With respect to LSR-7, please explain your understanding of other community resources in Lee Summit and how we best leverage.
Well, other resources, you've got the chamber, you've got the educational foundation. Lee Summit Economic Council. I think that it's important for the school district to stay in touch with organizations like this. I think it's basically mandatory. It's a must for board members and the school district to know what the thinking is in the community. And I think by using those types of resources, there's plenty of information to be received.
Okay. Define equity as it applies to our school district.
Well, again, I would say equity means, again, I'll say it again, preparing each student for success in life, and that's what I feel the district is doing. Equity means, in my mind, everybody has a chance to succeed. That's, as it pertains to the district, I think that's what that means. And I do think that the district does give every student the opportunity to succeed. Again, we have many resources other districts don't have. And I think, again, teachers, principals all feel that the teachers are capable of teaching all students in the district.
Okay. In your opinion, what inequities, if any, exist within our school district?
Some things I have seen, for example, there's obviously income disparities between certain schools, the incomes of the families and so forth. One thing I have noticed that schools that have very strong PTAs that have money to donate can get a lot of supplies that schools that have parents of lesser income cannot provide, like televisions, whiteboards, things like that. Things that the district don't provide necessarily, but PTAs can raise funds for those items. And it kind of depends on the principal. You might have a principal that's heavier into technology. You may have one that may be not as quite heavily into technology. But I do think as far as the resources some of the schools have, there could be a way of evening that out where all students would have access to these things like whiteboards, going around the room and doing your math problems, that type of thing. Some classrooms don't have as many of those as others do, and that kind of surprised me. So I think that's definitely one thing, maybe one of the main things that can be done to assist all the students.
How would you address those inequities?
Well, I think that's something that the board could discuss and maybe make recommendations. Now, I think for example, the PTAs are, they operate independently, obviously, but I think if some of these things are brought to the attention of others, there may be ways to solve that problem. Maybe money goes into, you never know about people though, if they know the money's going into a big pool, you may not get as much, you know what I'm saying. That's the issue, but I think the issue that I'm discussing here does need to be raised, that we do want all of these schools to have the opportunities to get all the teaching aids that others might have. Another thing, curriculum. Some curriculum, and I'm not giving names or necessarily want to know that or by any means that I'm an authority on this, but there are some curriculum that does seem to be in need of adjustment. For example, in elementary school, let's take science for example. Now this is what I've heard, and I definitely want to check it out, but this is an example of what a teacher told me, that when they're trying to do a science project or their lesson plans for science, they may go online and look at something that is for grades, let's say 3, 4, 5. So they have no way of knowing what another teacher might be teaching. A class book for science, if you give a little third grader a textbook rather for science, those aren't going to get out of date. Now some other courses that are taught in middle school or high school, those will get dated. Of course, we passed down handbooks for years, and you'd see yellow highlight markers in them and all that, but things have changed with the Chromebooks and so forth. But, I think at least in the elementary schools, having some textbooks would help. Chromebooks, I think there's maybe a misunderstanding, or maybe some of the teachers and parents weren't maybe instructed here in this district quite as well as maybe in some other districts as far as how to properly use a Chromebook. You know, you'll have some that swear by Chromebooks for math is the greatest thing in the world, and you'll have some that would like to have more written problems, for example, like, you know, a lot of us here used to do. But I just think by listening to various sources that some of these inequities, whatever you might want to call them, can be helped, adjusted.
Okay. Recent data provided by our school district shows that free and reduced lunch students are underperforming in math, science, and other categories. The data goes on to break down this group into ethnic subsets such as African American, Hispanic, Caucasian, and Asian. How do you interpret this data, and how do you propose the LSR-7 board address it?
Well, that's another very good question. I have pulled from several resources just for my own information. I pulled ACT scores from the entire state of Missouri to see how the various districts rank. For example, Lee Summit West is the top ranking high school in the Kansas City area. At number, I believe it was 15, give or take. We had Lee Summit at around 30, or Lee Summit North at around 30. Lee Summit was 45, give or take. So all schools were in the top 50 as far as ACT scores in the state. And there are roughly 425, give or take, districts that reported. As far as average ACT scores by state, Missouri has a large number of students participate in taking the ACT test. And the more students taking the test, the numbers will be lowered. You go to some of the states back east, Connecticut, Vermont, some of those, you might only see 30% or 35% of the students taking the ACT test, and those are students that more than likely really intend to go to college. So sometimes numbers can get a little skewed, especially on a national level. I do think socioeconomic factors are involved in how well students learn. Parental involvement, those things are all involved. But again, at Lee Summit, I think every student does have a chance to be successful. So if the student and the parents want to take advantage of all that the district has to offer, then they will be able to do that.
Last question. What is your long-term vision for the district?
Well, my long-term vision would be to, discuss a lot of the things we have discussed, but the long-term vision, if you consider long-term many years from now, or 10 years from now, whatever long-term would be, I think we need to concentrate on the district's perception, and sometimes that can take a few years, the perception within the business community, with citizens and taxpayers, with the Kansas City metropolitan area. There has been, I feel, a certain amount of damage done to the image of the school. Our stature has possibly been diminished some. So that is probably something longer term, maybe five years or so. It may take to really repair some of the damage. But that would be my if you want to call it a long-term goal, is just to work towards that. Also doing all we can to make sure that all schools have equal items to work with, teaching tools, and also to make sure that all teachers are getting the guidelines, the information to prepare their classrooms, their plans. One thing I have found out that's kind of interesting is that the MAP tests and end of course tests and all that all goes in that, I believe it's called APR, that just came out. But for example, MAP tests that the students did a school year ago just were received this past December, for example. The middle school levels, they have their end of course tests. They do some MAP testing, I guess, in 7th grade also. but 10% of their grade is supposed to be results from these tests, and they don't get the test results before the school year is ended. So I heard that's kind of and what the state also does from year to year almost, they will change the format and questions that are on these tests. So to compare one year to the next may not be that beneficial. So again, long term, maybe work with the state to quit changing stuff all the time, if you want to call that an issue, and it appears to be somewhat of an issue. That would be longer term also.
Okay. Well, Don, we got through that quickly.
That was my plan.
Well, you have the floor to tell us anything you would like to tell us, or go back on any of these questions, whatever you want. The floor is yours.
Right. Well, I feel that, I felt that I just had to run, if you want to call it that. I just feel that there's a need to participate right now in the school district, and with my background and so forth, I thought I might be a logical candidate. Plus the long history of the town, you want to see things maintained as you would hope they would be. But I've talked to a lot of people that I know, and not everybody I talk to really has concerns. They don't have kids. A lot of people haven't heard much about what's going on within the district, but just about everybody I have talked to has expressed some level of concern. And I feel there is a need within, especially parents who have kids still in school. I've got grandkids in school here, some grade schoolers over at Highland Park. But I think most people that are involved in the district have heard some of what's going on and may be a little bit disappointed with the superintendent and the board, if that's a proper way to say that. But I think they're just looking for some transparency from the board, the superintendent, and just have a better game plan about what really the district is striving for. That's a summary, I guess.
Okay.